Whoa, I had that on. Good evening, my holy sisters and brothers. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. Who is joining us for some beautiful learning? And today it's really beautiful. In short, what does the Lord require of us? We're going to be learning that today. Who is with us? Oh man, the screen is acting funny. I can make an adjustment. Okay, John in Maine, Stephen in Oklahoma, Renee in Indiana, Yehuda in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Stephen in New Hampshire, Paul in Chicago, Melissa in Great Neck, Brandon in Knoxville, Nancy, North Carolina, Paul in the Great Northwest, Christo in Lubbock, John in Sedona, Jeffrey in Maine, David in Notre Dame. Wait a minute, skipped on me. Here we go. Donna, first time here. Welcome, Donna. So glad you stopped in, and I hope you enjoyed. You picked a great day to make your first visit in our class. Bill in Columbia. Renee is talking about Reb Sandy Sasso's books. Awesome. Don't know those books. Sammy in Dallas. Bill, going to assume that the answer is something like do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with the Lord. Good guess. James says shalom. Paul is saying hi to Donna on her first day. Another David says shalom. Welcome everyone. Over there on the YouTube side, Lynn in North Texas, Marjorie in Georgia, Linda also in North Texas, different Linda, and Gigi in British Columbia. Welcome everybody. It is Elul. The countdown to Rosh Hashanah is really winding down. Less than 2 weeks. We blow the shofar every day of the last month of the Hebrew year. Isn't it great to get that wake-up call? Quick idea to share from Rabbi Twersky's book, The Enemy Within. I'm just learning this one for the first time, but all of Rabbi Twersky's books are amazing. And this book is talking about the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, connected to Satan, right? But not because Satan is some kind of a demon. Satan is an angel, but he's the prosecutor angel. And he is definitely out to prosecute the souls in this world and to show to God how we fall short and to tempt us to fall short and basically to show that we are not so dedicated to our mission. What is our mission? Increasing holiness in the world, making this world a suitable home for God's presence. And what was I just about to say? The Vilna Gaon says, and what's the first thing you have to do in order to increase holiness in this world is to make yourself holy, right? If you want to repair the world, you have to begin by repairing yourself. And the Yetzer Hara, that evil inclination, is always going to fight that work, right? And tell us, no, you are the way you are. You can't do better. You can't improve yourself. Accept the way you are. No. We're here to work on our midos. We're here to improve our attributes. So on this subject, the Chafetz Chaim, the holy Chafetz Chaim, an amazing rabbi. Nina's taught a whole class in the Chafetz Chaim. Highly recommended. That's available on our website. The Chafetz Chaim would come into the yeshiva study hall late at night and send the students to bed. Quote, the drive to stay up late at night to study Torah is not the work of the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination. Wait, what? You would think that somebody who's driving himself to stay up late at night studying more Torah, that's got to be good, all to the good, holy work. But, says the Chafetz Chaim, it is the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, that wishes to deprive you of adequate sleep so that your mind will be dull tomorrow. With this, he interpreted the evening prayer when we say, please God, remove Satan from before us and behind us, from in front of us and from behind us. And the Chafetz Chaim said, before us, in front of us, that's understandable. We ask that Satan should not be an obstacle to our doing mitzvahs, to our fulfilling our obligations. But what does it mean when we ask God to remove Satan from behind us? It means, says the Chafetz Chaim, that sometimes Satan stands behind us and pushes us as if to do more mitzvahs. Stay up all night and learn. Fast regularly as an atonement for your sins. Don't limit your charitable giving to the 20% limit that is stated by halacha. Give more and more, even if you impoverish yourself. By urging us to excesses, it may drain our energies and resources, ultimately incapacitating us so that we cannot observe Torah and mitzvahs. And this makes intuitive sense. If you're ever working on some kind of self-improvement project, or almost any project, right? And you know it's good for you to do it, you know it's good for the world that you do this, you really don't want to, right? You're lazy, you're tired, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of time, it's a big investment of money, resources, especially time. And you're gonna finally just push yourself to do it, right? And then so often what happens, we make this huge initial push right away, and then really it is too much, and we say, well, that project just wasn't gonna happen, and we abandon the whole thing. That was Satan working through our own evil inclination, saying, see, I'm going to push you to do this good thing, but too much too soon, and then you'll abandon it. That's how wily the evil inclination is. And that's definitely something to watch out for. That's why moderation in all things, balance, is so important. Okay. Let's get into today's daf. It is not a particularly long one, but it has some beautiful, beautiful pearls of wisdom we're going to encounter today. Okay, we pick it up at the bottom. So we're on page 49 here in Tractate Sukkah, the 7th volume of the Talmud. We are in chapter 4, and we are completing chapter 4 today. We've been discussing Mishna number 5 of chapter 4, and we're going to complete that today. The Mishnah continues. So we pick it up at the bottom of the B side of page 48. The basin to the west of the altar was for water, and the basin to the east of the altar was for wine. And they would tell the one pouring the water to raise his hand. So we're talking about the water libations that were performed in the Holy Temple on the Holy Altar during the festival of Sukkot. Every day there was a water libation. And we are told to rejoice during Sukkot. And the drawing of the water from that pool of Siloam just outside Jerusalem, that was immense, or just outside the temple compound, immense joy when that was done. Huge celebrations, and we still have those kinds of celebrations. Even though the Holy Temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago, we still have those celebrations because we are commanded to rejoice during Sukkot. And then there would be, the water was drawn from that spring, as it were, that well, and then it was brought into the temple. For the water libation done on Shabbos, they would bring the water to the temple on Friday afternoon. And then these libations were poured on the altar during Sukkot, and there were water libations and wine libations. And the sages taught in the Mishnah that there was an incident involving one Sadducee priest. The Sadducees didn't accept the authority of the Pharisees, of the rabbis who were teaching the oral law, which began with Moses at Mount Sinai. But the Sadducees thought they knew better, and the Sadducees are long gone. At any rate, at that time, there were Sadducee priests, priests serving in the temple who were of the Sadducee persuasion, who poured the water on his feet And in anger, because he didn't want to pour it on the altar, because that was an oral tradition that it was actually given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai. Other parts of the oral tradition were added by the sages to protect us from violating written laws of the Torah. But this particular one was actually given by God directly to Moses, but as part of the oral tradition. So the Sadducee didn't accept that, so instead of pouring wine on the altar, he poured it on his own feet. And in anger, all the people who witnessed this pelted him with their esrogim, right, with those fruits. They're holding the four species, the branch of the date palm, the myrtle, and the willow, along with a lemon-like citron, and they threw those esrogim at this renegade priest. And when that happened, on that day, the horn of the altar was damaged as a result of the pelting and the ensuing chaos. There were 4 horns on the altar. The altar was a platform, an elevated platform in the temple courtyard. There was a ramp leading up to it, which the priests would ascend and descend from the altar. And then the top was a rectangle shape, or I think a square shape. And at any rate, there were 4 corners, and there was a horn at each of those corners. Like the horn, it wasn't the shape of a horn. It was basically a little pillar at each of the 4 corners of the altar. And those were called the horns of the altar. And in that chaos, one of the horns of the altar was damaged. They brought a fistful of salt and sealed the damaged section, not because it rendered the altar fit for the temple service to make this temporary repair, but rather in deference to the altar, so that the altar would not be seen in its damaged state. In other words, to protect the modesty of the altar, kind of seeing, like in its damaged state, it's like it was exposed. It's almost like the inside of the altar is exposed, and that violates the honor of the altar, as it were. And if we're going to be so careful not to, embarrass or humiliate, the privacy or the feelings of this altar made of stone, how much more do we have to be super careful never to embarrass or humiliate a person who has tremendous feelings, and all of us hate to be embarrassed or humiliated. As any altar that lacks a ramp or a horn or a base or the shape of a square, there you go, the top was a square, either because it was not erected as a square or due to damage, is disqualified for use in the temple service. And Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda says even the surrounding ledge must be complete, and if it is lacking, it disqualifies the altar. So once they damaged the altar, it doesn't say what else happened that year. They might have patched it up so that the altar wouldn't be seen in its damaged state, but it would seem to me that they were no longer able to bring offerings on that altar until it was repaired. Now, maybe they could repair it during the intermediate days of the festival. They certainly couldn't repair it on the first day or Shabbos, nor on Shmini Atzeret, etc. We continue. Now we're on the top of the A side of page 49. Rabba Bar Chana said that Rabbi Yochanan said the drain pipes, shitin, built into the altar and extending beneath it were created from the 6 days of creation. Catch that? The drain pipes under the... Oh, yeah. Okay. I think we're still broadcasting. Okay, sorry. Very good. So it says the drain pipes built into the altar and extending beneath it were created from the 6 days of creation. The drain pipes under the altar were created from the 6 days of creation, right? Like at the very beginning of the creation of the world, the drain pipes of the altar were there. Long before there was Jerusalem, long before there was a temple, long before there was an altar, the drain pipes were created by God, God's self. What is the Gemara saying? As it is stated, Song of Songs 7:2, the hidden of your thighs are like the links of a chain, the handiwork of a skilled workman. The Gemara interprets this verse homiletically. The hidden of your thighs, these are the drain pipes that are concealed within the altar. Are like the links of a chain, chalaim, They are hollow, mecholalin, and descend to the depths. The handiwork of a skilled workman, this is the handiwork of the Holy One, blessed be He. On a similar note, it was taught in the school of Rabbi Yishmael that it is written, in the beginning, Bereshit, which is the beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1:1, do not read it as Bereshit, but rather as Barashit, meaning God created the pipeline descending from the altar. In other words, we have this idea that where the temple ended up located, this is the foundation stone of the world. It was from that point that the whole world was created. And when God did that, He built in these two holes that would become the drain pipes of the altar. Now you could say that David, chose that spot, and then Solomon built the temple. So it was humans who fashioned the holes that drain, the blood and other liquids that happen on the altar and go through the altar. But then they drain into a hole that goes down into the Temple Mount, and God created that passageway. It was taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yosei says these drain pipes are hollow and they descend to the depths, the hidden depths. As it is stated, let me sing of my well-beloved. This is from Isaiah 51, 1 and 2. Let me sing of my well-beloved, a song of my beloved, touching his vineyard. My well-beloved had a vineyard in a very fruitful hill, and he dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vine and built a tower in the midst of it, and also hewed out a vat therein. Rabbi Yosei interprets these verses homiletically as referring to the temple. He planted it with the choicest vine. This is referring to the temple itself. He built a tower therein. This is referring to the altar. And hewed out a vat therein. This is referring to the drain pipes. As the owner of the vineyard is a parable for God, this indicates that the drain pipes are a natural part of creation. It was taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok said there was a small gap between the ramp and the altar west of the ramp. So the ramp, right, like a ramp, like you can imagine a ramp, leading up to the altar. So the altar is a square-shaped platform, elevated, and there's a ramp leading up to it. And there's actually a little gap between where the ramp ends and the edge of the altar itself, the edge of that platform. What about this gap? So Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok said there was a small gap between the ramp and the altar west of the ramp. And once in 70 years, young priests would descend there and gather from there the congealed wine left over from the libations that set over time, which resembled round cakes of dried and pressed figs. And they would then come and burn it in sanctity in the temple courtyard. As it is stated, in sanctity shall you pour a libation of strong drink unto the Lord. So there were water libations only during Sukkot, but there were wine libations many times during the year. And some of that wine would end up in this gap. Now, it's good to listen to this, right? That the priests had a tradition that every 70 years they would go and clean out that congealed wine from that gap. Every 70 years, right? America has not even celebrated its 250th anniversary, right? So this wouldn't have even happened 4 times in the whole history of America as a nation. The first temple stood for 400 and, a little over 400 years. Then there was a 70-year hiatus after the first temple was destroyed, the Babylonian exile. Then the people came back and built the second temple, and it stood for another 400 plus years. Before the first temple was built, when judges ruled the land, and we still brought sacrifices to the priests serving in the altar from the desert, and the tabernacle was still standing and stood in a few different cities during that period. That was a 400-year period. So ancient Israel, right? The Jews occupied ancient Israel for over, going on 1,300 years. 1,300 years. Now, the Jewish history is even older than that because, there were hundreds of years of slavery in Egypt, and there was the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob before the Jews descended into Egypt. But even when you're just talking about the Jews, the ancient kingdom occupying the land of Israel, it was 1,300 years, right? And you hear that number, and it doesn't like what does it really mean? But now when you think about that in the temple, they had a maintenance schedule that every 70 years they would clean out this little gap between the ramp and the altar. Kind of brings home that extended period of time that we are talking about. And all of that ended. The second temple was destroyed in the year 70, which is almost 2,000 years ago. So it ended 2,000 years ago, but before that there was 1,300-year history. Long span. Referring to how they would dispose of this congealed wine, that after they had wine libations were poured on the altar, and some of it ended up in this gap, and then it was poured in sanctity, so they can't. It's not like they just scrape it out and put it in a garbage bag and let the trash man pick it up and take it away. They have to dispose of it carefully because it's congealed wine that ended up there because it was poured as offerings to the Lord. And just as its pouring is in sanctity, so too must its burning be in sanctity. From where may it be inferred that this is referring to burning? And Ravina said it is derived by means of a verbal analogy between the term sanctity, written with regard to libations, and sanctity, written with regard to leftover offerings. It is written here with regard to libations, liquid poured on the altar, usually wine, sometimes water on Sukkah. In sanctity shall you pour a libation. And it is written there with regard to leftover offerings, what's left over after an offering is brought. You shall burn the leftovers in fire. They are not to be eaten, for they are sanctity. Through the verbal analogy, it is derived that leftover libations must also be burned. Water will just evaporate, but leftover wine will congeal over time, and that needs to be burned. Skip a little bit. We're on the B side of page 49. Apropos the homiletic interpretations of the verses from the Song of Songs with regard to the drain pipes under the altar, the Gemara cites additional interpretations. Rava taught, what is the meaning of that which is written? Song of Songs 7:2. How beautiful are your steps in sandals, O prince's daughter, daughter of a prince. How is this interpreted? How beautiful are the feet of the Jewish people at the time when they ascend to Jerusalem for the festivals. We talked about Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot. These are pilgrimage festivals when the people would ascend to Jerusalem. And this beautiful flow of people going up to worship in Jerusalem, it was beautiful. It wasn't just that it was, a beautiful idea. It's that the people were ascending in joy, bringing their offerings, bringing what to celebrate with. It was just a beautiful procession up to Jerusalem. O daughter of a prince, this is referring to the daughter of Abraham, our patriarch, who was called a prince. As it is stated, the princes of peoples are gathered, the people of the God of Abraham. That's Psalm 47:10. And the verse calls the Jewish people the people of the God of Abraham, and not the God of Isaac and Jacob. Usually we refer to our patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why in this psalm is it only referring to the Jews as the people of the God of Abraham? Why? Rather than referring to all three patriarchs, the verse is referring to the God of Abraham because he was the first of the converts, right? Abraham was the first person to convert to Judaism, as it were. In fact, the first person in the world to convert to worshiping the one God. Everyone else in the world was a pagan, polytheist, sacrificing to idols and believing in multiple deities all over the place. Abraham was the first to recognize that there is one God. And so, everybody who believes in one God is a spiritual descendant of Abraham. And therefore, it is reasonable for the princes of other nations to gather around him. In the school of Rav Anan, it was taught, what is the meaning of that which is written in the Song of Songs 7:2, the hidden of your thighs? Why are matters of Torah likened to a thigh? It is to tell you that just as the thigh is always concealed, covered by clothes, so too matters of Torah are optimal when recited in private and not in public. You know, how the world has changed, right? In the ancient world, and probably right up until 100 years ago, you know, it was maybe much less, maybe 50 years ago, maybe 100 years ago. It was just unthinkable to expose one's thighs in public. Like they never did that in all the history of mankind. Maybe some tribes somewhere in tropical areas, but most of the world, modesty was a real virtue, and the thighs would always be hidden. And just as, natural modesty would require that one hide their thighs from the public, now Ravanan is saying that matters of Torah are optimal when recited in private. Now this is odd. Aren't we right now sharing Torah in a very public forum online? And that's a good thing. So what does it mean that matters of Torah should be kept private? And this is what Rabbi Elazar said. What is the meaning of that which is written? It has been told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord does require of you. Before I go on to that, what does it mean that matters of Torah should be private? So Rav Steinsaltz says, anyone who exerts himself in his Torah study in private grows wise, as it is written, with the modest is wisdom. In other words, no one is a master of Torah. Even the great masters of Torah toil extensively in private so that when they teach, they really know what they're doing. And that's like the great Gedolim, like the great, great, great rabbis of the generation. All the rest of us are, just doing the best that we can. We really have to work in private so that when we share Torah with others, we're prepared and we can give it over well. And now Rabbi Elazar comments. And this is what Rabbi Elazar said. What is the meaning of that which is written from Micah 6:8? It has been told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord does require of you, only to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Micah 6:8. Now he interprets these phrases. To do justly. This is justice. Make sure there's justice in the world. To love mercy. This refers to acts of kindness to other people. To walk humbly with your God. This is referring to taking the indigent dead out for burial and accompanying a poor bride to her wedding canopy, both of which must be performed without fanfare. You would have thought that when Micah says, what is it the Lord requires of us? To love, to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Okay, so that must mean create justice in the world, do acts of loving kindness, and have a really good, faithful relationship with God, right? To walk humbly with God. But no, walk humbly with God means there are certain acts of kindness that you do in this world that require you to do them quietly, without fanfare, so that you don't embarrass people. For an indigent bride who can't afford a nice wedding, so you slip her some money so that she can have the wedding that she dreams of. Or somebody who was poor and can't, there was no money for them to have a proper funeral and a proper burial. Well, that is also known as the true kindness, attending the dead. And you have to make sure that the dead get, their final journey, the final journey to their resting place must be appropriate and suitable. If the family can't afford to do it, then the community pitches in for that. And it's done without fanfare so that you don't embarrass the relatives. The Gemara summarizes, and are these matters not inferred a fortiori, if with regard to matters that tend to be conducted in public, as the multitudes participate in funerals and weddings, and the Torah says, walk humbly, then in matters that tend to be conducted in private, like giving charity and studying Torah, all the more so should they be conducted privately. Rabbi Elazar said, one who performs acts of charity is greater than one who sacrifices all types of offerings. As it is stated, to perform charity and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than an offering. Right? So we lament every day that the temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago and we're not able to fulfill all those laws. with regard to offerings. We just can't do that because the temple isn't in our midst. And we look forward to the day when the temple will be restored and we'll be able to do those laws. But we could take solace in the fact that here, right, the Bible says, Proverbs 21:3, that to perform charity and justice is even more acceptable to the Lord than bringing offerings to the Lord. And that includes all types of offerings. And Rabbi Elazar said, acts of kindness, meaning assisting someone in need, are greater than charity. So he's distinguishing between giving money and giving your personal assistance to someone. As it is stated, sow to yourselves according to charity and reap according to kindness. That's Hosea 10:12. Sow like sowing seeds in the ground. And this means if a person sows, meaning if a person plants seeds, it is uncertain whether he will eat or whether he will not eat, since much can go wrong before the seed becomes food. However, if a person reaps, he certainly eats. In this verse, charity is likened to planting seeds. Giving charity is like planting seeds. But acts of personal kindness to people are likened to reaping. So just as when you plant seeds in the ground, probably there's going to be food growing, months later when you harvest, but it's not sure. When you reap food, okay, it has grown out of the ground. It's sitting there in the field. You're just cutting it off the vine. Now the food is in your hand. Sure, you're going to eat. And likewise, when you give charity, it's an extremely good and beautiful thing to do. But even higher is giving people who are in need your personal time and attention. And Rabbi Elazar said, the reward for charity is paid from heaven only in accordance with the kindness and generosity included therein, and in accordance with the effort and the consideration that went into the giving. It is not merely in accordance with the sum of money. As it is stated, sow to yourselves according to charity and reap according to kindness. So here it's a little bit of a further nuance on this idea that, okay, it is better to give your time and attention, but we can't always do that, right? And so we're going to be able to, impact a lot more lives by simply giving money to charity. But when we give money to charity, we should, one, do it with a good attitude and with a full heart, so that it is an act of kindness to give that money to charity. And two, with some attention, right? We should put some thought into which charities we're supporting. We should try to follow up and find out, how it was used and read the report that the charity sends you about what they're doing. Take an interest in the causes that you are supporting. And the sages taught that acts of kindness are superior to charity in three respects. Charity can be performed only with one's money, while acts of kindness can be performed both with his person and with his money. Charity is often given to the poor. Acts of kindness are performed both for the poor and for the rich, right? The poor, definitely are in need of resources so that they could just get along in this world, for basic needs, food, shelter, clothing, etc. People who are well-to-do or at least comfortable, okay, they're not going to be so needy of that, but they might well be in need of emotional support. There's all kinds of acts of kindness, that everyone needs because they're human. And so acts of kindness, cover both giving money and giving time and attention. An act of kindness is therefore superior to charity. And charity is given to the living. You can only give charity to the living, but acts of kindness can be performed both for the living and the dead. The ultimate act of kindness, the true kindness as it's known in Hebrew, is, helping, giving a burial place to a corpse, right? Because the dead cannot return the favor. That's why it's called the true kindness. And you should always attend funerals and memorial services whenever that opportunity comes your way. It is a hugely important mitzvah, and you're never going to learn as much about life as you will by attending to the dead. And Rabbi Elazar said, so these are all teachings of Rabbi Elazar, anyone who performs charity and justice is considered as though he filled the whole world in its entirety with kindness. As it is stated, Psalm 33, he loves charity and justice. The earth is full of the kindness of the Lord. Lest you say that anyone who comes to leap and perform an act of kindness may simply leap and do so without scrutiny, the verse states in Psalm 36, "How precious is your kindness, O God." It is a precious and rare occurrence to perform an act of kindness properly. One might have thought that even a God-fearing individual does not always encounter the opportunity to perform acts of kindness. Therefore, the verse states, Psalm 103, "But the kindness of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting upon them that fear him." If you have awe of the Lord, he will place opportunities to do kindness in your path. Seize them, right? And to do it properly. So, for example, it is a great act of kindness and a big mitzvah to offer hospitality to strangers. When you do that, you want to treat them the same way you would treat, your best friend or a family member when they come to eat at your house or to stay over at your house. And when the visit has ended, it is proper to, see them on their way. At least walk them to their car or to the street if they're walking home. Make sure that they know where they're going and they have what they need to get to their next destination. Rav Chama Bar Papa said, and this is the last paragraph, and then I'm coming to questions. Rabbi Chama Bar Papa said, with regard to any person who has grace about him, it is certain that he is God-fearing, as it is stated. I'm just pausing because there appears to be a helicopter right over our house, and I hope it will go away soon. Okay, Rabbi Chama Bar Papa said, with regard to any person who has grace about him, it is certain that he is God-fearing, as it is stated, but the kindness of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting upon them that fear him. When one sees that a certain individual is endowed with grace and kindness, one can be certain that he is a God-fearing person. And Rabbi Elazar said, what is the meaning of that which is written, Proverb 31, "She opens her mouth with wisdom, and a Torah of kindness is on her tongue"? That's from Eshes Chayil. That's something that Jewish husbands, the Proverb 31, all those verses, we read to our wives at the Shabbos table on Friday nights. And this is one of those lines. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and a Torah of kindness is on her tongue. And the Gemara asks, is there then a Torah of kindness and a Torah that is not of kindness? Rather, it is Torah studied for its own sake that is a Torah of kindness, as one studies it wholeheartedly. And it is a Torah studied not for its own sake, but for some ulterior motive that is a Torah that is not of kindness. And some say that it is a Torah studied in order to teach others that is a Torah of kindness, and it is a Torah studied with the intent of not teaching it to others that is a Torah that is not of kindness. That concludes what we are going to be covering tonight. And that actually, there's just a few more paragraphs, but that is going to complete for us our discussion of chapter 4 here in Tractate Sukkah. And with God's help, tomorrow we'll open chapter 5 on page 50. Now let's check your comments and questions. Please remind us when Rabbi Elazar was teaching. I would have to look that up. But Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok is probably a Tana, a sage of the Mishnaic period. He might be a little later, which would make him an Amora, a sage of the Gemara, right? So the Mishna closes around the year 200. And then the Gemara closes around the year 500. So the Amoraim are the rabbis of the Gemara, active between 200 and 500. The rabbis of the Mishnah are sort of late Second Temple period, 100 before the Common Era, up to about 200, the year 200 of the Common Era. If he's called a rabbi, so most likely he was studying and teaching in Israel, right, in the land of Israel. And if he's called a Rav, he's most likely studying and teaching in the Babylonian Jewish community. I'd have to look that up, Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok. If I could do it really quickly, I will. If not, it'll have to wait for another time, but maybe I could do that. Elazar, the son of Tzadok, page 209. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Tzadok, does not have an entry. It just says, what? See Tzadok? That's so strange. Okay, I don't have a good answer for you right now. Let me continue. Bill Eldridge, I understand where the rabbi is coming from, but isn't it the case that when do these righteous deeds that require humility and no fanfare, that when we do these righteous deeds that require humility and no fanfare, that we do indeed grow into a closer relationship with God? Absolutely. And that's why it's leading into a discussion that a person, that when you look at this person, it's a person filled with grace and kindness. You can be sure that that's a God-fearing person. And what it means is, somebody who takes that command seriously, right? To do justice, to perform acts of justice, and to love mercy, to love acts of loving kindness, to do it with, that's what it means to do it with grace, right? That you're doing your obligations with great spirit and loving spirit. Why is that person so motivated to do that? Because it's not just instinct. It's because God told me to do that, so I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And sometimes, it's not so easy, and it takes practice and exercise to get better at doing that and to get better at doing it with the right intentionality, right? So you're absolutely right, Bill. Steve, if each word matters, why say walk humbly with your God, specifically your? Why doesn't it? Very good, Steve, right? So he's saying that every word in the Bible is there for a reason, and it could have easily said walk humbly with God. Why does it say walk humbly with your God? I would suggest, just thinking aloud, it's the same thing that we're talking about. It's also what Bill is saying, right? On the one hand, you want to do these acts of justice and loving kindness because God told you to do it. And because you have a good relationship with God, or you want to build a good relationship with God, you want to do what God told you. In doing these deeds, in visiting the sick, in attending to the dead, in feeding the hungry, in clothing the needy, in dowering the bride, etc. When you do those actions, you can't help but feel the goodness, the rightness of doing those deeds. And so by doing them, it sort of makes a nice feedback loop where it will bring you closer to God, right? And so it's not just God generally, but it becomes more your God because you're in relationship with God. And Sharon, finally, so in consideration of this teaching, why does the Psalm say, those that sow in tears shall reap in joy? I think that teaching classically is talking about the Messianic age and the resurrection of the dead, right? That eventually we're all going to be brought back, right? When the Messiah comes, and then all, the righteous people will be taken up to the Holy Land, and all the suffering that the Jewish people have undergone through all these centuries, right? In every generation, our enemies rise up to destroy us. The Holy One saves us. The Jewish people still exist, right? But, I was just talking with a good friend of mine who's a Christian, and we often have great conversations about faith. And, like the Jewish people have been around, longer than any of the other monotheistic traditions, as we spoke earlier, by a lot, right? The Jews have been here for well over 3,000 years. And yet, there's still less than 20 million Jews in the world. There's like 1.3 billion Christians, I think, and 1.8 billion Muslims, right? It's such a small group. Why? And part of the reason for that is there's just a lot of suffering and travails that the Jews have undergone, so many persecutions throughout history. But at the end of times, we'll see that there was a reason for all of it. It's not given to us to understand the suffering of the righteous now, both in our tribe and throughout all people in the world. We just don't understand why righteous people suffer and the wicked often prosper. But at the end of times, we will understand that, and we'll see what all that suffering was about. And then those, what we sowed in tears, we will reap in joy. So I think the sowing and reaping there is referring to something a little bit different than just, giving to charity or doing acts of loving kindness. But that's just a guess on my part. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow to open chapter 5 on page 50 here in Tractate Sukkah. And then we're going to be within a week of finishing this tractate. So we're really moving right along. Have a terrific night.